All right, we're going to explore a side of DeForest Kelley you probably haven't seen much of.
Yeah, most folks know him as Dr. McCoy from Star Trek.
Right, that southern drawl, always butting heads with Spock.
He
But
had a whole other career before Star Trek.
a career full of dust, six-shooters, and those classic Western landscapes. Decades of work in Westerns.
Oh yeah, I mean, some of those iconic shows of the genre.
Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The Lone Ranger, even Zane Grey Theater. You name it, he was probably in it. For this deep dive, we've got a whole pile of filmographies, articles, some first-hand accounts even.
And the range of roles he played is really something. He was often typecast as a heavy...
The bad guy.
Yeah, the villain, the outlaw, always stirring up trouble.
So let's saddle up and head back in time. Kelly's Western career actually started way back in the late 1940s.
Wow, before color TV even.
Think about that. Back when Westerns were booming, both on the big screen and the small screen. The golden age. And Kelley was right there in the thick of it.
He even played Morgan Earp in Gunfight at the OK Corral.
That's 1957, right?
That's right.
That's a pretty iconic role, even for someone who would later go on to be a starship surgeon.
And get this, that wasn't his only run-in with the OK Corral. He actually appeared in 3 different portrayals of that famous gunfight throughout his career.
That's wild. Do you think maybe he was hoping to change the outcome each time?
Maybe, but it really makes you wonder why that story resonated so much with him. What does it say about the kinds of roles he was drawn to? I mean, the OK Corral is such a pivotal moment in Western lore, right? It's this symbol of lawlessness versus order, personal vendettas, the cost of violence. And Kelley often played those kinds of characters, men on the edge of society trying to survive by their own code.
You know, there's a parallel there with Dr. McCoy, too, when you think about it.
Oh, how so?
Well, he's always wrestling with these ethical dilemmas, butting heads with Spock's logic, but ultimately guided by a strong sense of compassion.
Oh, yeah, I see it. It's like he was exploring those same themes throughout his career, whether it was a Selene showdown or a futuristic medical crisis.
And all those early heavy roles must have really shaped his reputation in the industry.
Right, they must have.
Do you think he ever felt trapped by that image? Like he was only ever going to be seen as the bad guy?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's easy to assume he resented being typecast, but some actors actually find comfort in playing a certain type. They hone their craft, become known for something.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it wasn't always a struggle for him. Maybe more of a challenge to bring depth and complexity to even the villain.
And if you look at his performances, you can see that depth. Even when he's playing the outlaw, there's often a flicker of vulnerability. Like, what led this guy down this path?
Makes you sympathize with the villain, even just a little.
Absolutely. He doesn't just play the archetype. He inhabits the character, gives them a backstory, gives them a soul, and that makes all the difference.
He really makes you wonder about the guy behind the gun,
Yeah, and that's probably why he works so much. Reliable, talented, could really bring depth to even the smallest roles.
And his filmography from the 50s and 60s, it's massive. I mean, we're talking Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Have Gun Will Travel, Wagon Train, Rawhide. It just goes on and on.
He even worked with some legendary Western directors and producers, guys like A.C. Lyles.
Oh, yeah, A.C. Lyle.
He was known for those big, action-packed Westerns, often with a touch of historical drama.
Right, right.
And he liked to use the same actors in a lot of his films, almost like a repertory company.
So for audiences back then, seeing DeForest Kelley in a new A.C. Lyles Western, it was almost like seeing an old friend.
Exactly. A familiar face, a reliable presence. Westerns really relied on those familiar archetypes.
It's funny, though, even with all those Westerns under his belt, he ends up in one of the most infamous creature features of all time.
Well, you're talking about Night of the Lepus.
Giant mutant rabbits terrorizing a town. How could he resist?
Well, even the greatest actors have a few interesting credits on their resume.
I've heard the script for Night of the Lepus was actually pretty good.
Oh, it's true. The story itself was solid.
Right,
Yeah, the problem was the execution, the special effects, trying to make real rabbits look menacing.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say it's a challenge.
So maybe we could just chalk it up to a noble effort gone wrong. Good script, dedicated actor, and then giant fluffy bunnies.
Yeah, something like that. But let's get back to DeForest Kelley in Westerns. It's fascinating to think about how all those experiences really shaped him as an actor, maybe even prepared him for, the role of a lifetime.
Because let's be honest, Star Trek wouldn't be Star Trek without Dr. McCoy. That Southern grit, the no-nonsense attitude, the way he spars with Spock, it's all so perfectly him.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You know, a lot of the actors who ended up on Star Trek, they had tons of Western experience before boldly going where no man had gone before.
You're kidding.
No, it's true. William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, James Doohan, they all spent time in the saddle, squinting at the sun, drawling their lines.
Wow, it's almost like Star Trek was this reunion for a bunch of space cowboys.
And it goes even deeper than that. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, he got his start writing for, you guessed it, a Western. Have Gun Will Travel, to be exact.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's true. It kind of explains a lot about those early Star Trek episodes when you think about it. The sense of adventure, those moral dilemmas, confrontations in dusty saloons. It's all right there.
Wow, so for Star Trek fans, understanding DeForest Kelley's Western career, it's not just trivia.
Right. It's like this hidden layer, you know, to the show's DNA.
Makes you wonder, what if Kelley had never put on a cowboy hat? Would he have still brought that same, gravitas to Dr. McCoy?
It's an interesting thought.
That same sense of experience, like he'd seen it all?
Hard to say for sure, but...
But I have a feeling those years on horseback, staring down outlaws, dodging bullets, it gave him a certain toughness, a certain edge that made Dr. McCoy who he was.
Like those Western roles were his training ground,
Yeah.
you know, preparing him for the challenges of deep space.
And it wasn't just about acting, He was known for being super meticulous about authenticity. Like that story about how he landed a role even though he couldn't ride a horse.
And immediately sought out lessons. He wasn't going to fake it.
He wanted to get it right, to really embody that cowboy spirit. And you can see that dedication in all his performances.
So when we talk about DeForest Kelley's Western career, we're not just talking about some movies and TV shows. We're just talking about, the foundation of this iconic character, the roots of this legendary science fiction franchise.
It's a reminder that sometimes, to reach for the stars, you got to get your boots a little dusty first.
It really makes you wonder what kind of career he might have had if Star Trek never happened.
Yeah. Would he have kept on with Westerns?
Right.
Maybe even become a leading man.
Right.
In those grittier, more revisionist Westerns that started coming out in the late 60s.
Yeah, it's a fascinating what if.
By the time Star Trek premiered in 66, the Western genre was already changing.
Oh, absolutely.
Moving away from those simple good guy, bad guy stories.
Toward more complex, morally ambiguous stories.
Yeah, like The Wild Bunch, McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Right. Those Westerns weren't afraid to get down and dirty. Show the dark side of the frontier, the violence, the corruption.
And Kelley, with his range, he could play charming and menacing. He would have been perfect for those roles.
Yeah, he could have been right up there with Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef.
Those iconic anti-heroes.
It's almost like his whole career was leading up to that shift in Westerns.
And then Star Trek comes along and whisks him off to space, another frontier.
And, in a way, Dr. McCoy is like the ultimate culmination of all those Western roles.
I could see that.
He's got that frontier doctor vibe, rugged individualist, sense of justice, but always a little rough around the edges.
Then that loyalty, to his friends.
Right, even when they drive him crazy.
You can almost imagine McCoy riding shotgun with Kirk on a wagon train.
Instead of outlaws, it's Klingons.
So to all the Star Trek fans out there, the next time you see Dr. McCoy going toe-to-toe with Spock or patching up some wounded redshirt, remember those dusty trails, those saloon brawls? All those years DeForest Kelley spent in Westerns.
All those years honing his craft.
It's all there, woven into his performance. A layer of depth and authenticity.
Very few actors could match that.
And it's a testament to Westerns, how they shape not just one actor's career, but an entire franchise that still inspires people today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about this. DeForest Kelley's career shows us that even the most iconic roles, the ones that really stick with people, they're often built on a foundation of experiences that might seem totally unrelated, even contradictory.
It's like all those years playing the bad guy, the outlaw, the tough guy, it gave him what he needed to play Dr. McCoy, who was a hero, a healer, a man of compassion.
It's really quite beautiful when you think about it. You never know where your journey will lead.
What paths he might take.
What experiences, even ones that seem completely different, might actually shape who you become.
So keep exploring, keep digging deeper.
And keep an eye out for those hidden connections.
Those unexpected influences that make a story, a career, a life truly fascinating.